sister stole my brand new car, wrecked it, then smirked, "It's just a car." At dinner, I watched her choke on a $45,000 bill in her name. I had spent years saving every extra dollar, skipping holidays, resisting impulse purchases, and running my beat-up old sedan to the ground in order to finally afford the one thing I had always desired, a brand new car that was entirely mine, paid for with my own hard-earned money. When I signed the paperwork and the dealer handed me the keys, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, unadulterated pride in myself. I ran my fingers along the smooth, gleaming hood, inhaled the intoxicating scent of fresh leather seats, and thought, this is mine. Every single part of it is mine. I hadn't even had the car for a full day when my younger sister Isabelle Lauren decided that my happiness was hers to take. Isabelle Lauren, who had been coddled and spoiled her entire life, had never worked for anything, taken on responsibility, or faced a consequence that our parents couldn't ignore. She was the type of person who handled other people's belongings as if they were her own by default, because that was how life had always been for her. When I pulled into our parents' driveway that evening to show them the automobile, Isabelle Lauren was already standing there, leaning against the garage with that lazy, self-satisfied grin she always had. She barely looked up from her phone as I parked. "Nice ride," she remarked, pushing herself off the wall and walking up, staring through the driver's side window as if she already knew it belonged to her. "What's the mileage?" I asked, trying to seem indifferent despite the fact that my patience was becoming thin. Isabelle Lauren let out a low whistle and nodded in appreciation. Then, without asking, she grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. "Let me take it for a spin." I quickly moved to close the door before she could get in, shaking my head strongly. "No way, I just received it. You aren't driving it." Isabelle Lauren rolled her eyes, as if I just told her she couldn't borrow a dime. "Oh, come on, Clara Moretti, do not be such a control freak. It's only an automobile." "Exactly," I snapped. "It's merely an automobile that I purchased with my own money. You do not get to take it." But Isabelle Lauren was never the type of person to just accept a no. She merely grinned, shrugged, and moved away. But something about her gaze sent shivers down my spine, like if she already had a backup plan in place. I should have trusted my gut. "Hello everyone. Sorry for interrupting your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and enjoy this video. Thank you." Later that night, I briefly left my car keys on the entryway table before going upstairs to fetch something from my room. When I got back down, the keys were gone, as was my automobile. My palms curled into fists as the knowledge hit. Isabelle. I ran outside, my heart pounding, but she was already gone, tires squealing in the distance. I took out my phone and dialed her number several times, but each time it went to voicemail. I was still seething when my phone called 3 hours later, but it was not Isabelle's number. It was an unknown caller, I said, already bracing myself. Inspector Miller spoke in a low voice, calm but concerned. "This is Inspector Miller from the County Police Department. I'm calling about a vehicle registered in your name." I felt my stomach drop. "What happened?" "There has been an accident." A pause. "The driver is unharmed, but the vehicle has incurred substantial damage." My hold on the phone intensified. "Who was the driver?" The officer hesitated for about a second before responding. "A young woman identified herself as Isabelle Lauren. I don't even recall driving to the crash site. One moment I was standing in my parents' entrance, clutching my phone with white knuckles, and the next I was driving up behind flashing police lights, my pulse a continuous drum of wrath. And there she was, my sister, standing next to what was left of my brand new automobile, arms crossed and unaffected. The front bumper was wrecked, the hood collapsed on itself, and one of the headlights was shattered. My gorgeous, exquisite automobile had been damaged, and Isabelle Lauren was standing there as if it were nothing. I climbed out of my old beater, slamming the door harder than I meant to, my hands trembling as I marched towards her. "What the hell did you do?" Isabelle finally turned to look at me, and then, in the most infuriating moment of my life, she smirked. "That sucks," she replied, shrugging as if she had dropped my ice cream cone rather than destroying my automobile. "But don't freak out. Margaret and Henrik will make you forgive me." The word struck me like a smack in the face. Margaret and Henrik will convince me to forgive her. It was not an apology. It was not even a recognition of what she had done. It was a smug, arrogant assertion that no, Matter how upset I was or how much damage she had caused, it would be irrelevant because our parents would smooth things over like they usually did. I took a deep, controlled breath, my fists locked at my sides, my heart pounding in my ears. That was the moment. Something inside of me shattered. I was not about to let her get away with it this time. Not this time. Have you ever had a sibling that felt they could get away with anything? Please let me know in the comments, since I had had enough of letting it slip. I awoke the next morning with a throbbing headache. My body is still stiff from the frustration of the night before. My imagination replayed every detail of that horrific encounter at the crash site. My sister's smirking smile haunted me like a nightmare that wouldn't stop. My car, my lovely hard-earned brand new car, was gone. Someone who had never worked in her life destroyed everything in an instant. Someone who had never experienced a single consequence. Someone who truly believed that my rage was nothing more than a disruption to her day. Someone who had never experienced a single consequence. Someone who truly believed that my rage was nothing more than a disruption to her day. I knew before I even got out of bed that my parents would call me, that they would demand a conversation, and that they would try to smooth this over as if Isabelle Lauren's actions were just another minor blunder that we could all forget about if I would just be reasonable, as a good daughter should. Sure enough, when I checked my phone, I found 4 missed calls from Margaret Lauren, 3 from Henrik Lauren, and a text message from Isabelle Lauren that was so stunningly arrogant that I had to read it twice to believe my eyes. Clara, Moretti, stop being so theatrical, it's only an automobile. Margaret and Henrik said, we'll figure it out, so quit acting like it's the end of the world. There was no apology, contrition, or even a recognition that she had made a mistake. Every comment was dripping with entitlement, as if the main issue wasn't that she stole and crashed my stuff, but that I had dared to make a huge fuss about it. I swallowed my wrath and forced myself to breathe gently, reminding myself that getting upset about a text message would not assist me right now. Isabelle had always been like this, and I knew where she learned it. I drove to my parents' house, my knuckles white against the steering wheel of my antiquated backup car, my stomach churning with rage and tiredness, knowing precisely how this conversation would turn out. I walked in without knocking, without bothering with pleasantries, to find my parents sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, their expressions a perfect blend of fake worry and thinly veiled frustration, as if I were the problem here, as if my reaction was the thing that needed to be repaired. Isabelle sat slouched in one of the seats, scrolling through her phone, seemingly unconcerned, as if she was waiting for the whole affair to blow over so she could get on with her life, leaving me to pick up the pieces of what she had ruined. Margaret sighed deeply, setting down her coffee cup as if fatigued by my presence and stroking her temples as if she were the victim in all of this. Clara, honey, we need to talk about this because your anger is unhealthy for everyone. I felt something icy settle in my chest. Something quiet but dangerous. A slow burning fury that I had carried for years but hadn't completely acknowledged until now. My wrath, I repeated, my voice unnervingly quiet, my hands resting on the back of an empty chair, holding the wood so tightly that my fingers hurt. Do you think my anger is the issue here? Margaret let out a deep sigh and exchanged a quick glance with Henrik, their wordless communication making it brutally evident that they were in agreement on this, that their choice had already been made before I walked through the door. Sweetheart, she began, her voice dripping with contempt, as if I were a child having a fit over a broken toy. It's only an automobile. Isabelle did not mean to crash it, and we don't believe it's right to penalize her so heavily for what was plainly an accident. I felt something inside me shatter, something that had been held together by sheer willpower for years, something that had been stretched, pulled, and torn far too many times. She stole it, I murmured, my voice flat and emotionless, because I knew if I allowed myself to feel anything, I'd burst. I told her no. She stole my keys anyway. She stole my car, ruined it, and then smiled in my face knowing you'd cover for her, as you usually do. Isabelle let out a dramatic sigh before looking up from her phone and rolling her eyes as if the entire topic was beneath her. Jesus, sis, you're acting like I murdered someone, she mumbled, shaking her head, her arrogance oozing out in waves. I made an error. Okay, calm down. Henrik reached out, resting a delicate palm on his eyes begging, his smile meticulously molded into something that appeared to be love, but was actually manipulation disguised as a nicer packaging. "Laura, you're her sister," he continued quietly, dipping his head as if he were speaking to a toddler in need of discipline. "I understand you are offended, but family forgives, dear. That is what we do. We forgive one another." I stared at him, astounded by the audacity of his comments. He had so easily placed the obligation on me to correct Isabelle's actions, as if my sentiments were an inconvenience, as if all of my efforts were in vain, as if my sacrifices weren't important as long as Isabelle was pleased. In that moment I understood that I had been conditioned my entire life to accept this treatment, to believe that my needs came second, that my anger was unwarranted, and that my anguish was something I had to swallow silently in order to keep the family peace. But I was not that person anymore. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into submitting this time. So I tried something I'd never done before. I smiled. It was only a glimmer of amusement, but it was enough to make Henrik stop. Isabelle gave me a suspicious look. "You know what?" I said, with a light voice and a deceptively tranquil smile, for I had already made my decision. "You're totally correct, Henrik. My family forgives, and I don't want to harbor this resentment anymore." I watched as relief washed over their features. Isabelle's smirk reappeared, and they all relaxed back in their chairs, certain that they had won, and successfully broken me down into the version of myself that they desired. However, they had no idea what I was planned. They had no idea that beneath my friendly grin and easy acquiescence, I was already setting things in motion. I was going to make Isabelle pay for what she had done. She just didn't realize it yet. I had been taught my entire life that family comes first, forgiveness is a virtue, and keeping grudges simply leads to resentment. But, as I sat in my car outside the insurance agency, clutching the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, I understood that those rules had always applied to me. Isabelle had never been asked to forgive, compromise, or sacrifice, because Isabelle had never faced serious consequences, not once. Never in all the years she had coasted through life on the backs of others cleaning up her mistakes. But things were about to change, and for the first time in my life I wasn't going to be the one left to pick up the pieces. When I walked into the insurance office, the air conditioning blasted on my skin, contrasting sharply with the fire that was seething in my chest. The calculating hatred that had been fueling me since Isabelle Lauren sneered at me and told me our parents would force me to forgive her. The man at the desk hardly looked up while typing something onto his computer. He asked how he might help with a clipped and professional tone of speech. I took a big breath, steadying myself before starting, knowing that once I started this, there was no turning back. "I need to file a claim for my car," I added, maintaining an even tone and a neutral look. He nodded, clicking a few more times before looking up at me. "Was it an accident? Do you have a police report?" "Yes, there's a report," I answered, my heart calm, my decision unshakable, and I need to report it as unauthorized use. That made him hesitate. He blinked once, turning his head slightly to see if he misheard me. "Unauthorized use?" he repeated, his voice full of inquiry. "Are you saying your vehicle was stolen?" I could have replied yes, but I knew better than to lie directly, especially when the truth was equally incriminating. "I never granted her permission to take it," I clarified, picking my words carefully to avoid misinterpretation. "I expressly informed her she could not drive my car. Yet she took it anyhow. That's theft, isn't it?" The man paused for a second before nodding slowly and putting something into his system, his gaze flickering to the screen as he read through what I imagined were corporate procedures on such cases. "If you can provide proof that you denied her permission and she took the vehicle anyway, then yes, this qualifies as unauthorized use." I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone, my fingers moving quickly as I pulled up the text messages from Isabelle, the ones where I had told her no, and she had laughed it off as if my words meant nothing. I turned the screen toward him and watched as he went through the texts, his brow furrowing slightly before nodding again. "This should be sufficient," he remarked, his voice now simply professional, his fingers moving with precision across the keyboard. "Since you're filing for unauthorized use, the liability will not fall on you. It will transfer to the driver," Isabelle clarified. Isabelle would assume the liability. The realization set in gradually, like warm honey trickling over the hard steel of my rage, coating it in something rich and wonderful. Isabelle, who had spent her entire life avoiding responsibility, would eventually have to answer for something. Isabelle, who had laughed in my face and told me I had to forgive her, was about to discover what it was. Like when the world did not bend to her will. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my voice steady though my heart was racing with a weird unknown excitement. Before speaking, the man looked at his screen and adjusted his spectacles. "Well, given the extent of the damage, the estimated total she'll be responsible for is somewhere between 35,000 euros and 45,000 euros. 35,000 euros to 45,000 euros. I breathed gently, letting the number wash over me like a wave of pure vindication. Isabelle had never received more than a slap on the wrist, nor had she had to bear the full consequences of her acts. But that weight was about to crash down on her, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it. By the time I stepped out of the office, the sun was shining stronger, the air was crisper, and I felt better for the first time since this nightmare began. I felt powerful. I felt free. Later that night, I sat in my apartment reading through social media, my eyes narrowing as I came across Isabelle's most recent post, a photo of her and her friends at a bar, drinks in hand, and her caption as haughty as ever. "Tough day, but nothing a few drinks can't fix. Some people need to chill out and move on. Life's too short to stress about little things. Small victories," that is what she termed it. The mere audacity of it caused a ripple of laughter through me, a sound so strange that it frightened me for a second before I sat back into the couch, shaking my head in amusement. Isabelle believed she had won. She thought it was over. She assumed our parents had bailed her out again, that everything would return to normal, and that I had simply swallowed my rage and moved on as usual. But Isabelle didn't know and wouldn't know until that insurance claim was processed that this time I wasn't going to let it go. This time Isabelle was going to learn the hard way, and by the time she knew what I'd done it would be too late. Sitting at the dinner table, I could already feel the weight of their expectations weighing down on me, thick and oppressive, as if they had all decided that today would be the night I finally got back in line. My father had prepared the table for a Christmas celebration with candles flickering in their holders and the aroma of roasted chicken and buttery mashed potatoes filling the air. His method of emphasizing that this was supposed to be a family moment, a night of healing, a scene meticulously staged to smooth over what they saw as unneeded discord. My mother sat at the head of the table, her normal dominating yet casual demeanor, revealing nothing, but I understood exactly why we were here, why this supper had been organized so soon after the disaster, and why Isabelle sat across from me with that annoying sneer stretched across her face, her phone sitting next to her plate as if she couldn't be bothered pretending this mattered at all. I felt it coming, the inevitable conversation they had all planned in their heads, the carefully chosen words they would use to persuade me that my anger was an inconvenience rather than justified, that my reaction was exaggerated rather than appropriate, and that Isabelle deserved my forgiveness simply because she was a family member. But as I sat there, my hands lying in my lap and a big envelope placed between my fingers beneath the table, all I felt was a strange sense of serenity. Because unlike them, I knew how this evening would finish. Isabelle was the first to speak, her voice dripping with the arrogance she had cultivated since infancy, her words laced with contempt, her smirk growing as she sat back in her chair, arms crossed over her chest. "So have you calmed down? Or are you still planning to throw a tantrum over a stupid car?" The words barely registered, stirred anything inside me because I had already expected them, was prepared for how she would turn this into a joke, and knew she would try to make me look unreasonable in front of our parents. I simply cocked my head, flashing her a faint, unreadable grin, watching as her confidence swelled in the face of what she mistook for submission, and my parents exchanged relieved glances, mistakenly believing they had won. My father let out a big sigh, intended to sound exasperated yet gentle, as if he were playing the tiresome position of mediator, as if he were the only one with the patience to cope with me. "Clara, sweetheart, I know this has been a stressful situation for you, but we really need to put this behind us as a family. Isabelle made a mistake, but you holding on to this anger isn't going to fix anything." My mother, the voice of reason, the woman who prided herself on being rational and pragmatic, nodded along as she cut into her chicken, speaking without looking up from her plate. "Life is too short to get caught up in things like this. Clara, at the end of the day, it's just a car. Things can be replaced, family can't." Isabelle's delight radiated out to me. I could see her relishing my perceived defeat. Her ego grew with each passing second, and her sneer became more irritating by the minute. She picked up her fork, spinning it between her fingers and shook her head in mock despair. Seriously, sis, you need to chill. I swear you've always been like this, overreacting, making everything a huge deal. I mean, come on. I cracked a car, not your entire life. You'll get over it. I finally moved when she let out an amused chuckle. My father reached across the table to place a soothing hand on mine, and my mother offered a slight nod of approval to Isabelle's comments. I reached behind the table, brought the envelope out, and carefully placed it in front of Isabelle. The sound of thick paper striking the polished wood was loud enough to make all three of them pause. Isabelle gave it a quick glance, her sneer remaining firmly in place as she shook her head, rolling her eyes as if I was being dramatic, as if anything I was about to do couldn't possibly be worth her time. What's this? Some angry letter about how I hurt your feelings? Read it, I said simply, my tone steady and my expression unreadable. Something in my tone must have piqued her interest, because for the first time that night, her amusement wavered, her smirk wavering just slightly as she went for the envelope, fingers trembling for a split second before tearing it open. The moment she took out the papers and studied the words printed across the top, the color drained from her cheeks so fast that it was almost pleasurable to behold, almost lyrical in its irony. I watched in silence as her hands tightened around the pages. Her lips opened and closed silently, and her entire demeanor changed from arrogant confidence to quiet dawning dread. My father frowned, looking between us with perplexity, his hands still resting near mine and tightening slightly. Clara, what is this? Isabelle's voice was scarcely audible, her fingers grasping the documents so firmly that the edges crumpled under the strain. What did you do? I took a sip of wine and let the stillness last just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I waited just long enough for Isabelle to feel the weight of reality on her shoulders before speaking, my voice quiet, measured, and almost compassionate. That, dear sister, is the finalized insurance report, the one that officially transfers full liability to you. The air shifted abruptly, dense with tension and stifling in its weight. The startling revelation hit my parents like a smack in the face. My mother eventually looked up from her plate, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, her eyes sharp and calculating, attempting to piece together what had just occurred, trying to comprehend how Isabelle had gone from untouchable to accountable. My father drew his hand away, scanning through the papers with increasing concern, his breath catching as he understood what this meant, as he read the numbers printed clearly in bold ink. Isabelle appeared terrified for the first time in her life, and I had never felt more satisfied in my entire life. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she pushed back from the table with enough force to rattle the silverware, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts, her face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and fury, her hands clutching the insurance papers so tightly that it crumpled under her fingers. She stood there for a bit, her chest rising and falling as she looked at me with something resembling betrayal, as if I had somehow harmed her by refusing to roll over and accept her actions, as if the true crime here was not her irresponsibility, entitlement, or larceny, but my audacity and forcing her to face the consequences of her conduct. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight, low, and furious, quivering with barely controlled wrath. This isn't funny, Clara. Tell me you're joking. I didn't answer right away, allowing the silence to stretch between us, watching as panic flickered across her face and she looked from me to our parents, as if she expected them to come in and solve things before it spiraled out of control. My father's lips were slightly parted, his fingers gripping at the fabric of his shirt, and his gaze darted across the papers in front of him, as if looking for a loophole, a way out, or some piece of information that would make this all disappear. My mother, ever the controlled one, took a deep breath and pressed her hands flat against the table, her voice measured and serene, but tinged with something dangerously close to frustration. Clara, she began, her eyes sharp and heavy with anticipation, as they always were when she wanted me to fold. This is going too far. You're punishing your sister in a way that isn't just cruel, it's vindictive. Isabelle let out a bitter chuckle, the sound hollow and forced, her fingers raking through her hair as she turned away from the table, pacing like a trapped beast and shaking her head in shock. This is insane. You're actually trying to ruin my life over a goddamn car. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed across my chest, my look unreadable and my speech steady. No, Isabelle, I'm not ruining your life. I'm just not cleaning up your mess this time. My father inhaled deeply, his palm flying to his chest as if I had physically struck him. His eyes wide with surprise, as if he couldn't believe I was refusing to play the role they had assigned me from childhood. The role of the responsible one, the one who forgives, smooths things over, and makes sacrifices so Isabelle does not have to. "Sweetheart, this is going to follow her for years," he said, his voice shaking and his fingers gripping on the papers, as if he could will them away. "Insurance claims like this, the financial burden, this isn't just some small punishment. This is going to ruin her credit, her future, her ability to do what?" "Henrik," I interrupted, my voice sharper now, my patience wearing dangerously thin, my hands pressing against the edge of the table, to keep steady, to keep coasting through life without consequences, to keep taking whatever she wants without thinking about how it affects others, to keep letting you and Margaret protect her from reality. Isabelle slammed her hands against the back of her chair. Her jaw clenched, her entire body twisted so tight I thought she would split in half. "You're genuinely behaving like I killed someone," she growled, her eyes flaming, with wrath and her voice quivering with incredulity. "I made a mistake. Okay, I've taken your automobile. I damaged it. I was careless about it. Fine, I got it. I botched up. But you," she waved furiously at the documents in my father's hands, her visage twisting in frustration. "You went out of your way to make this as horrible as it could be for me." Something inside me sparked at those words, something raw, something furious, something that had been simmering for years but had never fully risen until now. I stood slowly, carefully, my gaze locked onto hers, my voice low but unwavering, my rage icy and precise. "You didn't mind that I lost something I labored for. Why should I worry if you are losing something?" The words hit her, harder than I expected, knocking the breath out of her lungs and causing her expression to falter for a moment. A flicker of regret flashed across her face, but it was quickly buried beneath layers of entitlement, anger, and the unwavering belief that I was the one who was being unfair. My mother exhaled through her nose, rubbing her temples as if my resistance to cave was a little annoyance. "Clara, I understand you're upset, but this isn't right. We are family. We do not do this to each other." I laughed dryly, shaking my head, and crossed my arms over my chest. "We don't do this to each other." "That is funny, Margaret, because Isabelle had no trouble doing it to me, and you had no difficulty allowing her." Isabelle sneered, shaking her head in disbelief, her hands holding her hair as if she were ready to tear it out. "I don't have that kind of money," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly as the gravity of the situation dawned on her. "How the hell am I supposed to pay for this?" For the first time that night I smiled, but it wasn't warm, soft, or forgiving. "Figure it out," I said simply, turning away from her and walking toward the door, refusing to look back, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing even a sliver of doubt in my expression. Isabelle had taken something from me, and for the first time in her life, she was going to give something back, whether she liked it or not. I heard my father call after me, his voice high with desperation, pleading with me to think this through, to be reasonable, and not let it tear the family apart. But I didn't stop, turn, or hesitate. Isabelle didn't call, text, or reach out for days, and I wasn't surprised because I knew exactly what she was doing. She was scrambling, panicking, and trying to find a way out of the mess she had created, desperately hoping that someone somewhere would bail her out the way they always did. I could picture her, pacing in her overpriced apartment, running her hands through her hair, calling our parents every hour to demand that they fix this, just like they had fixed everything else for her in the past, never once stopping to consider that perhaps, just maybe, this was a problem too big for them to ignore. I knew my parents had money, but I also knew that they weren't wealthy enough to magically disappear 45,000 euros without making serious sacrifices, dipping into funds meant for their own security, and shaking the foundation of their comfortable lives in a way that would make them deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. And if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that my parents despised discomfort. The banging on my door came 4 days later, and I didn't even need to look through the peephole to know it was her. The aggressive knocking, the impatient huff of breath on the other side, and the absolute entitlement nearly radiating through the wood were all the confirmation I needed. I took my time responding, allowing her to stew, allowing the silence to last long enough for her to wonder if I was even going to acknowledge her at all, allowing her to feel a fraction of the frustration and helplessness that I had felt when she had stolen and wrecked my car without a second thought. When I finally opened, The door, I saw her standing there looking disheveled, the dark circles under her eyes more pronounced than usual. Her normally cocky posture, slightly hunched, her fingers twitching at her sides as if she was barely holding herself together. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over my chest, my expression carefully neutral as I arched a brow at her. Something is wrong, Isabelle. Her jaw clenched at my words, her eyes blazing with something dark, something dangerous, something that appeared to be a last-ditch attempt at control. You need to undo this, she whispered, her voice low, tight, and barely held. I do not care what you want from me. Please make this go away. I let out a quiet breath through my nose, shaking my head. Slightly, my expression constant, my patience non-existent. It's done, I replied simply, my voice firm, calm, and immovable. You'd need a lawyer and around 35,000 euros to dispute it. And we both know you do not have either of those things. For a split second I saw something in her face crack, a tiny fracture in the carefully constructed mask of confidence she had worn her entire life, a flicker of pure, unfiltered panic that she couldn't quite suppress, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by anger, resentment, and the same defensive arrogance she always resorted to when things didn't go her way. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh, running both hands through her hair before dropping them to her sides, her shoulders tensed, her breathing uneven. You seriously hate me this much? She demanded, her voice rising now, her composure slipping with every passing second. You seriously think I deserve to have my entire life destroyed over a peed car? I tilted my head slightly, eyeing her with something resembling amusement, cold and aloof, and devoid of empathy. Isabelle, you smashed my car without a second thought. Why? Should I care if I am wrecking your financial account? Her hands curled into fists at her sides, her nostrils flaring, her entire body shaking with barely contained rage, her voice breaking under the weight of her own desperation. This isn't fair, Clara. You're punishing me for something that was never meant to be so serious, and it wasn't designed to ruin me. I made a mistake, okay? A dumb error. But what you're doing is cruel, it is calculated, it's absurd. I felt my lips twitch. Not a smile, not anything at all, just a small, satisfied acceptance of the irony of the situation of Isabelle suddenly experiencing something she had never contemplated before. Culpability. You'll figure it out, I answered, simply shifting my weight onto one foot, my voice light and dismissive. Isn't that what you usually do? Isabelle had nothing to say for the first time in her life. I started to close the door, but before I could, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and I saw her face shift into something that almost resembled fear. Her fingers, fumbling to pull it out, her eyes scanning the screen with a mixture of confusion and dread. I leaned casually against the doorframe, watching as her expression darkened, her jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles. I inquired, my voice tinged with fake innocence, my gaze never leaving her face, her mouth opened slightly as if she wanted to say something. But no words came out, just a sharp uneven breath, just the sound of her own world crumbling around her, and I knew in that exact moment that she had finally gotten the message I'd been waiting for her to receive. The one from her employer, informing her that her reckless behavior had raised concerns, explaining that her recent promotion was now being reevaluated, making it clear that for the first time in her life, Isabelle was truly alone. I didn't wait for her to look up at me, to see the full scope of her realization, or to hear whatever pathetic excuse or desperate plea was bound to spill from her lips. Instead, I simply smiled, a slow, knowing, satisfied smile, and gently shut the door in.